Before I ever laid a single stone for the chicken coop or wired together the first homemade ether-powered generator, I asked myself one question. What if freedom could be engineered? Not voted into existence, not granted by a system, but built, bolt by bolt, seed by seed, from the soil beneath our feet and the boundless energy around us. That's the spirit of being a self-sufficient farmer today. We are not just growers of crops and raisers of livestock. We are creators of our own systems. Our food, grown with our own hands. Our power, not from the grid, not from solar panels that give out on cloudy days, but from energy fields that modern textbooks dare not explore, those ancient, omnipresent forces once whispered about by Tesla and suppressed by the gears of industrial empires. Our machines, built in backyard sheds where curiosity outshines certification. We don't need permission to innovate. We just need a screwdriver, an idea, and the will to unlearn what was never true. This is not the farm your granddad ran, though he probably dreamed of it. This is a living, breathing ecosystem, pulsing with independence. The cows fertilize the fields. The geese alert you to intruders. The goats trim the wild brush. Even the chickens, cheeky little anarchists, rotate across pastures, scratching the soil back to life, giving eggs, meat, and fertilizer in return. So allow me to properly welcome you. Self-Sufficient Backyard warmly greets you, friends. Today, I want to bring you into a very personal journey, not just of growing food or raising animals, but of growing a whole new way of life. You see, this wasn't always a paradise. When I started, I had little more than a patch of land, a pile of salvaged parts, and an obsession with freedom. Freedom from power bills, from grocery stores, from systems that ask you to trade your time for things you could make yourself if only they'd taught you how. So I taught myself. I read ancient texts on regenerative farming. I dove into fringe science journals, not the ones funded by corporate labs, but the ones written by lone engineers in tiny apartments, testing coil loops and vortex theory on kitchen tables. I scoured the blueprints of Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger, who spoke of water and air as sacred carriers of life and energy. Then I experimented. My first ether-powered generator ran for only 7 minutes. It sputtered, hissed, and smoked like a dragon with asthma. But when that tiny light bulb flickered on, powered by nothing but the empty space around me, I knew the textbooks had lied, and I knew I was never going back. But energy was just the beginning. The land around me became a canvas for a new economy. Not an economy of credit scores and shareholder reports, but one where value flows in cycles. Chickens provide eggs and compost. Compost grows crops, crops feed goats. Goats clear land and give milk. And everything feeds back into everything else. There's something divine in that. I remember one evening, exhausted from digging irrigation channels, I watched the geese, my self-appointed security team, chase off a fox. Not only did they protect the flock, but they returned to me afterward, honking like war heroes demanding a victory snack. That moment, silly as it sounds, felt sacred. Nature, when nurtured right, wants to help you thrive. And I began to understand something deeper. Sustainability isn't a product. It's a relationship, a contract between you, the land, the animals, and the truth-seeking spirit that refuses to settle for broken systems. This journey has had its bruises. The early days were all missteps and muddy boots. I once tried to enclose the chicken run with magnetic fencing. Yes, magnetic. Don't ask. The chickens were unimpressed. But that's part of the charm. When you're free to fail, you're free to create. That's what I want you to feel as we walk together through this story. Not just the lessons I've learned about livestock or infrastructure, but the core philosophy that you don't have to wait for the world to fix itself. You can start right now, in your backyard, in your garage, with your hands. Because freedom is not a destination. It's a farm you build, one hoofprint at a time. The truth is, you can't build a better world on borrowed time and borrowed things. You need roots, real ones, deep in the earth, anchored in the choices you make every day. Not in subscriptions, not in algorithms, not in the latest updates to a service you don't own. That's why a self-sufficient ecosystem, grounded in food, water, and energy you produce yourself, isn't just a charming idea. It's the foundation of the only kind of freedom worth living for. We're taught to think the service economy is progress. that flipping burgers, trading clicks, or juggling spreadsheets on someone else's cloud server is the natural evolution of work. But it's not work. It's noise. 1,000 busy hands producing nothing they can hold. And behind all that noise, someone is always watching, always counting your hours, taxing your time, managing your potential like a stock in their portfolio. That's not a life. That's a leash. In contrast, imagine this. A piece of land where chickens fertilize the soil, goats clear the brush, ducks eat the pests, and everything you grow has a purpose. Nothing wasted, nothing owed. You wake up in the morning, walk barefoot to check on the geese, and breakfast is already clucking at you from the coop. That's not just farming, that's sovereignty. And that, my friend, is what true libertarianism means. Not the distorted, cold version some academics like to parade around, but the sacred essence, that every person has the right to shape their own destiny without interference, and that cooperation, not coercion, is what builds lasting harmony. A self-sufficient ecosystem is the seedbed of this philosophy. It's not a romantic fantasy. It's a system of interlocking truths. You raise chickens, and their manure regenerates the soil. That soil grows elephant grass, cassava, and corn. That feed fattens the goats. The goats keep the weeds down, and their milk nourishes your family. The geese protect everyone with an instinct older than any alarm system. Meanwhile, excess produce becomes compost, compost becomes fertility, and around it goes. Every part plays its role, because every part belongs. Contrast that with the world outside, a service-based economy that alienates us from value. A plumber doesn't eat the pipe he fixes. A marketing intern doesn't understand the product she promotes. We trade in abstractions, each of us 3 degrees removed from anything real. That's not just inefficient, it's dangerous, because the more disconnected we are, the easier we are to control. When people rely on institutions for their food, they'll accept any price. When they depend on utility companies for power, they'll accept blackouts. When they need tech platforms for connection, they'll accept surveillance. And when all they have is time to sell, they'll sell their souls just to pay rent. That's why I chose diversification. Not for profit, but for resilience. On my farm, I don't just raise one kind of animal. I raise chickens, ducks, geese, and goats. Each one fills a different ecological niche like instruments in a symphony. If a disease wipes out one flock, the others carry the weight. If corn fails, cassava thrives. The system bends, but it doesn't break. You see, nature doesn't do monocultures. Only humans do that, when we're told efficiency matters more than balance. But balance is survival. Balance is wisdom. And the more diverse your homestead, the more unshakable your independence. I'll never forget something a Vietnamese farmer once told me during a trip abroad. He was 83, with a back like a question mark and a grin like a Buddha. He said, "If the chickens stop laying, the ducks still quack. If the ducks get eaten, the goats still climb. But if the government cuts your paycheck, what do you eat?" Then he tossed a sweet potato in the air and laughed like he'd figured out the secret to immortality. He had. Because when your life depends on the cooperation between species, not contracts, when your economy is built on cycles, not services, you begin to understand the meaning of interdependence without dependency. In a world where AI is replacing more jobs than it's creating, and global systems become increasingly unstable, the smartest investment is not Bitcoin or stock portfolios. It's a goose that hisses at thieves, and a goat that trims your fence line. Because these things answer only to you. They don't crash, they don't spy, and they don't go down when the servers do. That's the vision I had when I expanded this farm. Not just to raise more animals, but to build a living shield against the fragility of fake economies. To create a system so deeply interwoven that no single failure could undo it. A web of life, not a tower of cards. And the best part? This vision scales. You don't need 50 acres. Start with a rooftop garden, a few quail, a compost bin. The moment you own your inputs, you start to reclaim your future. Because in a self-sufficient world, fate is not a government policy or a quarterly report. It's a seed in your hand, a hammer in your grip, a goat on your hillside. And when your economy begins in your backyard, the world no longer tells you what to do. A truly free world isn't built with slogans. It's built with hammers, screws, and the quiet hum of a water tank filling itself at dawn. If the dream is a self-sufficient civilization where each person is the master of their own time, energy, and nourishment, then the bones of that dream are made of infrastructure. Real stuff. Barns, water systems, fences, coops, shelters. These are not just structures. They are symbols of dignity reclaimed, autonomy restored. This is what most people forget. Freedom is heavy. It takes nails, labor, sweat, mistakes, and time. Not a political speech, not a vote, not even a beautiful idea. You can chant liberty all day, but if your goats have no shelter in the storm, you are still dependent. If your chickens go thirsty while you're at the market buying water by the liter, your revolution is just a weekend hobby. That's why, when I decided to scale up my farm into a resilient, diversified system, I knew it had to start with building infrastructure that served the animals and the land without draining me in the process. You see, the service economy thrives by making you perpetually busy. Too busy to build. Too busy to repair. Too busy to think. You work so you can pay for convenience, and then you pay again for the things that break because they were never built to last. But when you live outside that loop, when you construct your own systems, suddenly time slows down and becomes yours again. Take the barns, for example. They weren't some prefab metal boxes off the internet. I designed them based on the movement patterns of the animals, on how the wind blows across the fields, on where the sun rises and sets. I measured, sketched, scavenged, and eventually raised frames with my own hands. Not out of romanticism, but out of necessity. I had to ask questions like, how can I store heat in winter without electricity? So I studied thermal mass. How do I prevent overheating in summer? So I built with open rafters, passive vents, and shade angles calculated from solar paths. Not from apps, but from the sun itself, which, last I checked, still runs without a login screen. Then came the automatic watering system. Now listen, I'm not talking about smart irrigation linked to Wi-Fi and prone to updates that break everything. I'm talking about gravity-fed tanks, homemade float valves, and a network of tubing that I patched together from repurposed PVC and salvaged barrels. Goats drink when they want. Ducks splash without oversight. And I can focus on breeding cycles, pasture rotation, and experimenting with etheric energy prototypes instead of hauling buckets every 2 hours. This right here is the Libertarian Temple. Not a marble building with flags, but a barn with airflow, gutters, compost systems, and a watering line that doesn't ask your permission before it does its job. One day, while fitting a new catchment pipe under the north awning, I was joined by a neighbor, an accountant who had just lost his job after AI tools replaced half his firm. He looked around at my scaffolding, the piles of bamboo, the goats headbutting an old wheelbarrow, and said, "You're lucky. You don't need the system." I smiled and handed him a wrench. "No," I told him, "I built a better one." Because here's the truth. The infrastructure you build determines the life you can live. If you live in a world built by someone else for someone else's profit, you will always serve that world. But if you build your own, piece by piece, you are no longer just surviving. You're shaping reality with your bare hands. That's why every wire, every beam, every hinge matters. Not just for function, but for philosophy. When you install a gutter that channels rain into a tank that feeds your animals and irrigates your crops, you're saying, I do not consent to scarcity. When you build a barn that keeps your livestock dry through storms, you declare, I protect what's mine with wisdom, not permission. And when you develop an off-grid infrastructure that keeps running even if the entire grid collapses, you are free in the most sacred sense. Of course, it wasn't easy. I built the first goat shelter too low. Woke up one morning to find 2 goats standing on the roof, eating the shingles. Another time, I miscalculated the slope on the watering system, and all the water flowed backwards. But every failure taught me how to see systems, not just parts. It taught me the design language of nature: gravity, pressure, shadow, decay, renewal. A language that no corporation teaches because once you learn it, you don't need them anymore. Let me tell you something Nikola Tesla said that stuck with me. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. What he didn't say, but what he showed through his life, was that these secrets could power machines without fuel, generate light from the air, and yes, structure your farm so that energy flows, not just works. The barn I built isn't just shelter. It's a tuning fork for a rhythm of life that beats to my own intention, not someone else's clock. The watering system isn't just convenience, it's a feedback loop between nature and design. And all of it, the compost bins, the fencing, the solar dryer, the ram pump in the creek, it's not just infrastructure, it's infrastructure of freedom. And once you have that, no one can take it from you. Because it wasn't bought, it was built. If you want to understand whether a system is truly free, look at how it treats its smallest, simplest parts. For me, that truth has always lived in the way my chickens and geese move across the land, how they forage, protect, fertilize, and multiply with a rhythm that speaks louder than any manifesto. You don't need a flag to declare independence when you have a flock that feeds you, guards your garden, and creates the next generation of their own kind. Chickens were my gateway to sovereignty. I started with 5, each with a personality louder than a political debate. They taught me about cycles, laying, molting, brooding, hatching. But more than that, they taught me patience, timing, and how to observe instead of control. You can't force a hen to lay, but give her space, warmth, calcium, and peace, and she gives you life in a shell. That's how real economies work, built on care, not commands. And then came the geese. Oh, the geese. Honking warriors of the homestead. I used to laugh at the idea that they could protect anything. But one night, I heard their siren call as a fox crept toward the coop. By the time I grabbed my flashlight, the fox had already fled, chased off by 3 furious bundles of feathers with no tolerance for tyranny. That was the night I stopped calling them birds and started calling them sentinels. This isn't just animal husbandry. It's political theory with feathers. Because every egg laid, every gosling hatched without interference, every chicken scratching for bugs in healthy soil, that's a declaration that nature knows what she's doing when humans stop trying to dominate and start trying to understand. And that's why I raise them not as livestock, but as partners. I breed carefully, not to maximize profit, but to ensure strength, adaptability, and harmony within the ecosystem. The goal isn't mass production. The goal is continuity, a sustainable line of birds who live, defend, reproduce, and nourish without input from a factory or a feedlot. Think about this. A rooster can fertilize a dozen hens. A goose pair can raise goslings that later patrol the land like their parents. You don't need stock options when you have stock that multiplies. You don't need security systems when your geese never sleep. You don't need inspiration when the daily miracle of life is scratching, pecking, and honking right outside your door. And if that's not wealth, I don't know what is. So here's what I want you to remember, wherever you are on your journey. It doesn't take a massive farm. It doesn't take permission. All it takes is one step toward autonomy, one bird, one bucket, one stubborn belief that you were born to be free, and that your backyard can become the most powerful classroom, factory, temple, and fortress all in one. Raise your own food, and you'll never be hungry. Build your own systems, and you'll never be owned. Protect your own flock, and you'll start to remember what it means to truly live. From me, and from all the 2-legged feathered revolutionaries on this land, thank you for walking this path with me. This is Self-Sufficient Backyard, signing off with muddy boots, a full heart, and a few eggs in hand. Now, go build the life they said was impossible.